Hi all, my name is Ben Robinson. I am in the Aerospace Defense and Government Business Unit at NI. Been at NI for about 10 years. Today, for Asian and Pacific Islander Month, I'm going to do a cooking demonstration. But to tell you why I am doing that, to make a little more sense out of that, I would like my fiance to explain why we are cooking what we're cooking today.
Hi everyone, I'm Allison Kwong. Some of you might recognize me. I actually used to work at NI. That's where Ben and I met. But today Ben's gonna make Mapo Tofu, and this is one of my favorite dishes. My mom always made it for me when I was a kid. She still makes it. It's just super flavorful, very comforting. That's our rice cooker going off. And honestly, it took me years before Ben was willing to try Mapo Tofu, but when he finally had it, he loved it. And I think tofu is a protein that not a lot of people know how to cook and, associate with being bland. But this dish is really, really good. I think kids would love it. It honestly tastes like a spicy hamburger helper, in my opinion. So with that, I'm gonna let Ben demonstrate.
Cool. So the first thing we're going to do is go through all the ingredients. I put a list of them along with this recipe, but it's nice to kind of look at all of them. First thing we've got is onion, standard onion. Hopefully most of you have cooked with onion before. You can use white or yellow onion. We're using white onion simply for the flavor. It's a little less sweet. That's what we like. The next thing is garlic. So you can see we minced the garlic there. The recipe calls for, I think 3 to 4 cloves or a tablespoon. We go a little heavy. Mince up your ginger, looks like that. You should get about that size or smaller. With both of these, one nice way that you can get better mince than I've gotten here is to use a grater or a microplane, but this works just as well. Then we've got shiitake mushrooms. Shiitake mushrooms aren't the easiest thing to find here in Central Texas. So if you can just find dark mushrooms, brown mushrooms, or even white mushrooms, if that's all you can find, those will work as well. Now we get into kind of like what the core of makes Mapo Tofu what it is, and those are the chilies. So the first thing is dobanjang. That is a fermented bean and chili paste. So we buy something that comes in a package that looks like this. It comes in a number of different form factors, jars, things like that. But it is essentially the core element in making Mapo Tofu. If you don't have this, you're not making Mapo Tofu. So make sure you track down some of this before you try and make this recipe. The next thing are kind of the standard chilies. In Texas, we're pretty familiar with chilies. These are Sichuan chilies, so these are actually chilies from China. The variants that they grow in China, probably unlikely ones that came directly from China, or maybe. So in Chengdu or in the Sichuan province where Mapo Tofu is from, chilies and spicy cooking are kind of like the way of life there. That's why this is such a representative dish of that area. And then the last thing, and by the way, if you don't have chilies like these, or if you can't find Sichuan chilies like these, chiles de árbol, so Mexican chiles de árbol work almost as well. They're a little spicier, so be careful. Don't maybe put in as many as are called for in the recipe, maybe knock 1 or 2 off. Then there's Sichuan peppercorn. So Sichuan peppercorn are these little peppercorns. They're very much related to black and green and pink peppercorns that you might be familiar with, but they kind of create the spice or the feeling within this dish that makes your mouth go numb. So they're incredibly hot. When you put them in the dish, you want to mash them up like this so that you don't get like a whole peppercorn at one point in a bite that you're taking, because that can ruin your day. And then a thing that we add and that is called for in the recipe, but you can leave it out or you can add it, is more chili oil. So this is oil and chilies and maybe dried garlic or some other things that have been kind of put together to make a condiment that's often put on Chinese food to make it a little spicier, to give it more flavor, more chili flavor. So we love this stuff. We put it on all kinds of things, but we also put it in this dish. So then we've got our proteins, our spices, and all of our oils and such. We've got ground pork. We're going to deal with that in a minute. We've got tofu. I'm also gonna show you guys what I do to prepare that in just a second. Oils, we've got cooking wine, so Chinese cooking wine. This is not like Japanese cooking wine. Please don't put a sake in this thinking that it will replace. Sake is much closer to like a European or grape wine. It's a little sweeter. This is extremely dry. So if you're gonna replace it with something, try and find like incredibly dry white wine. Otherwise, you can just leave it out or replace it with vinegar. This is the vinegar that we're going to use. This is Chinese black vinegar. So Chinese black vinegar is awesome. It is fermented to get that flavor, and so it adds a lot of really cool depth of flavor. It is hard to find. You have to go to an Asian grocery store probably to find it. You won't have it in the ethnic aisle of your local grocery store. If you can't get a hold of it, or if you want to cook this dish without having this in the pantry, rice wine vinegar will work, but you don't get that awesome depth of flavor, that umami that you get from this, so we highly recommend it. This does include soy sauce. So we've got two kinds of soy sauce here. We're only going to use one, but I want to show you the difference between the two. So this is a lighter soy sauce. This is kind of the standard soy sauce you find on a table at a restaurant that you would go to. So this is the stuff we're going to use tonight. It's saltier. It's a little more liquid. It's not as unctuous. This is dark soy sauce. You can kind of see the difference. You can see it kind of rippling and waving a little different. This is like an umami bomb of liquid umami bomb. And so it's less salty. It is aged longer. It is fermented longer. It is super tasty. We're not going to put it in this dish, but in a lot of other dishes, if you want to add more umami or flavor, you want to use this guy. It's awesome. And the other thing is sesame oil. So sesame oil is actually a dark oil. It comes from sesame seeds. Unlike in a lot of other oils where they say like the clearer the oil, the better it is for cooking at high heat and that kind of thing, we're going to throw that rule out the window here. And we're going to use sesame oil to cook everything. It just adds an awesome flavor of sesame seeds on everything that we cook. And then the last couple things, we have our garnish and our spices. So ginger, we already have some minced ginger, some fresh ginger, but we're also going to use granular ginger, garlic powder, white pepper. White pepper is a really, really awesome ingredient. It's almost like a mix between like a really floral, like salty pepper. It's like a really tasty thing to add all those flavors at once to your dish, and salt. And so those are all going to be used for us to do a quick brine on our pork. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to add a little bit of white pepper to our pork, a little bit of salt, a little bit of ginger. We're going to add a little bit of the sesame oil, the vinegar, the soy sauce, and the wine as well. Just kind of add all those flavors into our pork while we're getting ready. Yes, yeah, sorry. For any of you out there who saw that, hey, I thought we served this over rice. Where'd the rice go? Hopefully you started the rice by now. So if you're cooking it on a stovetop, this is the time that you could be letting it sit underneath the lid, getting ready after you brought it to a boil. If you're cooking in a rice maker like we are, hopefully you can just kind of like get it going when you start this whole process, and it is kind of cooking along in the background. Cool. And then, awesome. So finishing off with my vinegar, cooking wine, and soy sauce. Definitely should have made sure the vinegar was open before I started. Allison, can you help me with that?
Yeah.
Cool. So the other thing that you could be doing right now, as we're figuring this out, that I'm going to do here in a second, is you can be getting your stovetop going. So with this, there's a couple of different ways that you could be cooking. You can cook it on like a saute in a saute pan. Saute pans are really good for this kind of thing because they're flat. They have walls. It makes the cooking process really good. What we're using is a wok. So a wok is also a good option for this. It actually doesn't cook as evenly on the bottom, so a saute pan might. Okay, so I accidentally stopped that. We're going to use a wok to cook. When you cook anything on the stove, you want to have it at the heat that you're starting to cook at. So contrary to the way that a lot of people cook, you don't want to start with a pan that's cold, start cooking, and then it'll warm up. You want to have your pan at the temperature you're going to cook at. For this, we're going to cook pretty hot. So you're going to want to bring it to medium-high. When the oil hits this, you should be able to hear it. It should make a pretty serious popping and hissing noise when it hits that. So we're going to let that get going. While we do that, I'm going to show you when we fold in the tofu to this dish. We're going to want it in cubes. And so the easiest way that I have found to do that is tofu almost always comes in a package like this. And so just while it's in the package, take a knife, hold it like this, and just kind of like put the cubes in it.
Tell them it has to be silken tofu.
Yeah, so it's very important when you get this that you get silken tofu or soft tofu, sometimes is what it's called. If you get hard tofu, we're not going to get the texture that you want. Especially if you're trying to serve this to people who don't like tofu, that's gonna stand out like a sore thumb that there's these like hard chunks of tofu in the dish, and that's not gonna make them happy. So let's come back over here and get started. So I'm gonna throw some sesame oil in the pan. So you can hear it, maybe you can hear it already kind of starting to pop. You can see kind of the smoke coming off, so we're in good shape. So we can kind of get going here. First, onions. You always want to put like your heavy aromatics in first. So generally that's onions for most recipes that exist in the world, some kind of onion. And you want to actually give those quite a bit of time. It takes a while for onions to develop. And so if you hurry onions, you're actually going to get like raw onions in your dish because the heat won't go straight into these onions anymore once you put all kinds of other stuff in the pan. And so make sure you give the onions some time to like really break down, for the sugars to break down in the onions. And then you can prep. The next things we're going to put in are our light aromatics, and so those are ginger and garlic. So when you are breaking onions down like this, when you're sweating the onions, make sure you give them time to sit in one spot. Don't like be constantly moving them around. You essentially just want to move them enough to keep them from burning because that concentrates the heat on them more than moving them around and actually giving them a break from the heat as they're doing this. Starting to look good. As you can see, I brought my pork over here. It's sitting in this kind of like quick marinade still. We're kind of infusing it with all those flavors before we even put it in the dish. That is going to go in here pretty soon once these onions are ready. All right, so I'm seeing some browning on the onions. Let's get the light aromatics in here so that they can toast up and start adding flavor and fragrance. When that ginger goes in, you'll know it. You should be able to smell it. It's awesome. All right. we want to make sure there's enough oil in here so you can see that everything's like kind of got oil on it. So I'm actually going to add a little more oil, and you want to give the garlic and the ginger really just enough time that you can tell that they've kind of opened up, that all the oils in them have kind of started coming out and getting in with everything else. You can smell like really heavily that smell that comes off with like garlic and ginger, and then we're gonna give them a break from the heat by adding the pork. And so along with the pork, we're also adding a lot of liquid, both in the pork and from the marinade, as well as fat. And so that's kind of dissipating all the like heat that was going on to the onions and the garlic and the ginger. All right, so make sure, because this is ground pork, you really need to like work it and like work in all the ingredients that were already in the pan into the pork, so that you can, one, break up the pork, so you have these like big hunks of pork that aren't cooking or that are, you know, in your dish. We're going for a very like ground pork feel, so like kind of minced pork all over the place in our dish, and it also won't cook well if you know, we just like leave a big hunk of pork in the middle and we've got little bits off to the side. We've got burned pork in one place and undercooked pork in another, and undercooked pork in particular is no fun. But once we've got things kind of worked together, you can kind of spread the pork out a little bit and leave it there to cook, because you want to get like a lot of heat on it and create kind of like the crunch on the outside, that crust, that there's like a Maillard reaction between the sugars and the proteins and the fats that are in here, and you want that to form on the outside. And while we're doing that, we'll get our mushrooms ready, which are going to be the next thing to go in, as well as all of our chilies. So the pork is starting to develop up. It's still pretty pink. We want to make sure that we cook it until we don't see any of like kind of the dark pink like color of raw pork throughout. Like I said before, raw pork, there's no fun. You definitely don't want to be eating too much of that. So make sure that you give this an opportunity to cook. We're going to put plenty of broth in here once we get this cooked. And so if you overcook it a little and you take a little bit of the moistness out of the pork, that's okay. We're just going to put it right back with broth. So make sure you get it nice and cooked. Don't go short on this one. All right. So while I'm letting that cook, I'm actually going to add a little bit of my my liquids that season stuff that are in here. So we're going to add a little bit more black vinegar. A little bit more soy sauce. And the nice thing about soy sauce is when we're adding this, we're adding salt too. So don't necessarily have that heavy a hand on salt. You can do a lot of that with your soy sauce. Add a little more of our cooking wine. Awesome. Okay, and now once we feel like we're getting pretty darn close to having the pork all cooked, which I think that's the point I'm at here, I'm going to add all the mushrooms. So we're going to give the mushrooms a little bit of time to cook in here. So mushrooms cook really fast, and we've diced them pretty small, and so they really don't need much time at all. in order to get to the right consistency that we want here. So fold them in, get them all over the place. Try and get them as close to the heat as you can by getting them down to the bottom. All right, and now that we've given that a little bit of time to melt together, let's hit it with all the chilies. So first we're gonna go, let's do the dogochang. So our fermented black bean chili paste is gonna go in there. I'm gonna use the spoon that I just used to kind of mix things around so I can get it all off of the spoon. So all of it goes in. And then I've got my Sichuan chilies that I'm gonna throw in, and my Sichuan peppercorns are gonna go in. And we're going to get those all incorporated in to the dish and give them a chance to get a little bit of heat so that they can release their oils and their fragrance and all that before we really quench the heat in here by adding our broth. So we've got that worked all together now. We've got all of our aromatics, all of our pork, all of the chilies in there. They're stewing. They're getting the chili flavor all over everything. And now we need to cool it all off and put us in a good place to make a sauce. And so we are going to dump, in this case, I've got chicken stock. But you can use just about any kind of stock for this recipe. The heavier stock that you use, so like beef stock or mushroom stock, the more flavor you're going to add of that thing. Chicken stock is a pretty neutral stock. Vegetable stock is even more neutral, where you're not really adding the flavor of like vegetables, say, to the dish. You're just kind of adding water and like kind of that herbaceous flavor of vegetable. So Allison, as a kid, remembers eating this and it being like pretty saucy. So in the recipe, I call for a cup. We eye it and we put like a fair amount of like extra sauce or extra broth in there because she really likes having kind of a heavy or a lot of sauce to this dish when you're finished with it. And so now we're still on a pretty high heat, but we want to wait for it to get to the point where it feels like it's almost like boiling throughout, where all that broth is kind of like bubbling all over the place. And then we get to make our make a slurry. So I'm gonna get a ladle. Because it's going to make things a lot easier to make a slurry. Or here, I'll do a big spoon. And so I'm going to grab some of the liquid out of our Mapo Tofu with my big spoon. And put it in a separate container. This could be anything. It could be a pint glass you got laying around, or a glass. Just make sure it's not anything that, if hot liquid's in it, it's gonna hurt you or melt or fall apart or anything like that. If it's a paper cup, you might wanna be careful. We're using these kind of plastic deli pints. And then we're gonna take cornstarch, and we're gonna put a little bit of cornstarch in that. They generally call for like equal parts generally in a slurry. It's like equal parts cornstarch to the amount of liquid that you put in there. We like I said, Allison really likes kind of a lot of sauce in hers, or like a heavy slurry, so I go heavy on the cornstarch. And then we're going to mix that together here. So what this does is it gives us a place that we can really make sure that the consistency of what we're going to put into our sauce isn't like overly lumpy or have a bunch of cornstarch in it that like isn't breaking down. And so in this way we can get a really smooth consistency before we add it to the dish itself. And I'm actually going to add a little more. And you can hear the Mapo Tofu boiling away over here. So it's hit the temperature we want it to hit. Make sure if you're taking the time, like I'm taking, to make your slurry, that you mix it every once in a while so you don't get any burned to the bottom or stuck on the bottom of your pan. There we go. We're gonna work this slurry into a nice smooth consistency. Alright, and then we're just going to add that slurry right on top. And I had a little bit of extra cornstarch on that spoon, so I just kind of stuck it in there. And I'm going to mix things around with it, see if I can't get it off of there. Add that to my dish. Here we go. So now that we've got the slurry built, we want to turn the heat all the way down. You can either go to simmer, you can go off. It depends on how much heat you think your pan is going to hold. If you think it's going to hold a little heat for a little while, so like this is a pretty heavy bottom pan, I just go ahead and turn the heat off. But if you think that you've got a pretty thin one, or maybe you weren't cooking super hot, you can just turn it to like simmer or turn it down. And from here, we are going to add the tofu. So once the temperature kind of comes down, because we don't want to cook this tofu, we just want to add it. It's already cooked. It's been cooked to death. So we just need to add it to this beautiful mixture. So we're going to take this already cubed tofu. We're just going to kind of plop it on top. There we go. And from there, you just want to lightly fold it in. So we want to keep this kind of shape that this tofu is in as we've kind of added it to our dish, this kind of beautiful cube shape that is going to leave it in the dish as both a visual element and as kind of a change in texture as we eat. And so you want to lightly come from the bottom over the top and just kind of fold the tofu in to the dish. And once you feel like you've got it pretty well incorporated, that's it. You just cooked Mapo Tofu.
Yay!
So, yeah. Clap for everybody who's never cooked Mapo Tofu before and just did it. All right. So the reveal. Beautiful Mapo Tofu. Awesome. So once you have it in your serving dish, or even if you're just making your, you're doing it communally and so everybody's grabbing themselves a bowl, maybe putting a little bit of rice down first and then putting that on top, you want to garnish it. So we're just going to garnish the whole thing here, but you could do it individually per bowl. So the two things we add for garnish are green onions or shallots, those, and then cilantro. Obviously, if you're a super taster, you're not going to want to do that. This would make the whole dish taste like soap for you, so you can just skip it. Maybe add a little bit more green onion or shallot. But we love cilantro, so there it is. So there we are, Mapo Tofu. Hopefully, for any of you who were afraid to try this before, you'll try it now because it's awesome. So hopefully, everybody's going to have a great AAPI month. Support folks who are trying to keep AAPI folks safe. And we'll see you soon.